Well, congratulations are in order for you as you've made it all the way to week 10 of Old Testament 101, the last week of our study, and we'll be ready to move right on into Old Testament 102 in just a couple of weeks. But I'm so glad that you've made it thus far, and I appreciate all the hard work that you've put into your assignments. It's obvious that you're taking your studies very seriously, and I really appreciate all the effort that you've put forth. As we come to week 10, we're going to be studying the Bible books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. And these three books conclude the section of the Old Testament that is known as the historical books. And it brings us to the very end of Old Testament history, all the way up through the end of the exile and the restoration to the land. Ezra actually tells about the first restoration under the Edict of Cyrus that we saw at the conclusion of 2 Kings. And then he goes into detail in the first 6 chapters of Ezra, talking about events that transpired with that first group of people being restored to the land. And then in chapter 7, he picks up with his own return, a second return, about 60 years later. And he's a part of that return, and he talks in the ensuing chapters about some of the rebuilding activities and some religious reform that took place during those days. And Nehemiah is a contemporary of Ezra. He comes a little later, and he picks up with the help of rebuilding and restoring the people spiritually. And so the two books are books of encouragement and hope for the people as they are seeing things move along now, as the people have been able to be restored after the Babylonian captivity. And now they are rebuilding the land and seeing God move in wonderful ways. So these two books are a very, very important link between what happened in the previous years of Old Testament history, and now after the captivity has ended and the people are restored to the land, and the beginning of the process of rebuilding. Esther is another historical book, even though it is not written in the same way as Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra and Nehemiah contain a lot of historical fact, and I'm not suggesting by that Esther is not a historical book. It indeed is a historical book, and it tells a beautiful story of a historical event that shows the graciousness of God and how God providentially and sovereignly watches over his people, and he always has someone ready to answer his beck and call, to be a leader, to be a deliverer. And God's hand is seen so obviously and evidently through the book of Esther. It is an amazing avowal of God's graciousness toward his people, of God's using his own providential guidance to lead and direct, even when things seem to be hopeless and beyond help. God arrives on the scene and he raises up the people that are necessary to bring about his purposes and plans and continue his work of salvation history through his people Israel. So these three books bring to a fitting conclusion Old Testament 101, as we will now move into a different section as we move into 102. And again, I trust that this has been a very good and profitable study for you as we have gone through these books of the Old Testament. And I trust that you will have benefited greatly from your study. You have now seen a little better how the chronology of the Old Testament historical books fits together. And now, as we begin going into a different section, we'll begin seeing how different parts of the Old Testament fit together as well. And so I trust that you've had a great week. And if you have any problems, any questions that you'd like to ask, please let me know by email, and I will get back to you as quickly as possible. God bless you as you begin your last week of study in Old Testament 101, and I'll look forward to seeing you again as we begin Old Testament 102 in just a couple of weeks. Have a great week.